Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the slow swirling steam of the Ottoman imperial kitchens, where time seems to brew as gently as the coffee itself. Picture this: you're barefoot, padding softly across cold marble floors under a ceiling high enough to let smoke vanish quietly into the heavens. Giant copper pots clink in the distance, and somewhere, perhaps dangerously close to your ear, someone is grinding cardamom by hand with all the patience of a monk. The smells are overwhelming in the best way. Roasted beans, sweetened rosewater, a whisper of orange peel, and the unmistakable warmth of something about to be poured into a very tiny cup with very high expectations. You are the Kaveci Basha, the palace's chief coffee taster. Well, almost. You're new. You don't even have your special sash yet. But don't worry, the job isn't particularly dangerous, unless you consider the minor risk of poisoning a sultan with an improperly brewed cup, or the very real possibility of being scalded by a silver spoon wielded by a jealous rival, or spilling on the wrong silk robe. Okay, fine. Maybe you wouldn't survive this job, but tonight, none of that matters. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, let me know your local time and where in the world you're watching from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The kitchens of Topkapi Palace are their own little empire. You walk through the main hall, past an open window where pigeons coo lazily on the sill. There's a rhythm to the place. Hundreds of people chopping, whispering, humming, sweeping. It's a chorus in minor key. You hear languages from all corners of the Ottoman domain: Arabic, Greek, Armenian, Turkish, and something unplaceably soft from a corner near the cinnamon jars. That's the thing about empires. They collect people like spices, and everything gets a little richer in the pot. As you enter the kave ocha, the coffee hearth, you feel a shift. The air is warmer, slower, more focused. This isn't a noisy stew hall. This is sacred space, and it smells divine. Beans roast in tiny batches. Water simmers in hammered copper ewers. And at the very center of it all is the current, Kaveci Basha, tall, bearded, and serene in a way that suggests either deep meditation or extreme boredom, possibly both. He glances at you, nods once, and returns to his shezve, an elegant, long-handled pot designed to brew exactly one perfect cup of coffee at a time. You watch as he stirs clockwise, then counterclockwise, then lifts the pot just before the foam dares to rise over the rim. Timing, he murmurs, is everything. Historians still argue whether the Kaveci Basha was truly among the most influential servants in the palace, or simply ceremonial eye candy. But when you see the way everyone glances toward that one steaming cup, nobles, guards, even kitchen overseers, you begin to understand. Coffee here isn't just a beverage. It's a gesture, a statement, a risk. As the newest apprentice, your job is humble but crucial. Observe, listen, and above all, don't get in the way of the bean line. You're shown to a corner where older apprentices sort through raw beans, tiny green jewels that smell faintly of grass and mystery. Your fingers learn to spot imperfections. One chipped edge? Toss it. Slightly shriveled? Toss. Too shiny? Weirdly matte? Definitely toss. You realize quite quickly that most beans don't make the cut. Only the flawless, quietly proud ones are deemed worthy of a sultan's palate. Next comes the roasting. You sit beside a broad, flat pan heated by glowing coals, where the beans must be stirred constantly by hand. Not too fast, not too slow. You begin to sweat and question your life choices somewhere around the third batch. An older apprentice chuckles softly and whispers, "Think of it as meditation or punishment." Same result. As the day winds down, you're offered your first official sip. It's served in a tiny porcelain cup without a handle, resting in a golden holder shaped like a tulip. You're warned not to gulp, not to slurp, and not to burn your tongue unless you wish to lose it socially. You bring the cup to your lips. The taste is nothing like the gritty street brew you remember from the outer bazaars. This is velvety, dark, almost chocolatey, with a strange whisper of smoke and citrus. There's no sugar, but it doesn't need it. It hums on the tongue like a lullaby. You close your eyes. The bearded Kavechibashus watches you. Well? He asks after a long silence. You panic slightly. It tastes patient. He smiles. You've passed the first test. Your quarters are modest but cozy, tucked behind the spice pantry in a hallway that always smells faintly of cloves and cloves. Just cloves. Always cloves. You lay on a simple cot with a wool blanket and the faint glow of an oil lamp overhead. Outside, the courtyard begins to quiet. Somewhere, an oud plays a melancholy tune. You feel tired, but also proud. A few weeks ago, you were scrubbing copper pans in the fish kitchens. Now you're learning the slow, rich dance of coffee and power. You're not just preparing drinks. You're entering a world of coded glances, subtle gestures, and perfectly timed pauses. It's still strange to think how something so small, a single cup, could carry so much meaning. But then again, that's the empire for you. It makes art from tiny things, beads, threads, beans, and tonight, you get to be one of them. You're up before the call to prayer, woken not by any alarm, but by the rhythmic creak of a basket pulley being lowered outside your window. A fresh delivery of Yemeni beans, dusty, fragrant, and carefully bundled in woven sacks, has arrived from the port. You stretch, groan softly, and pad your way barefoot across the cool tile floor. The scent hits you first, earthy, slightly citrusy, with a depth you didn't yet know beans could have. Today, you're going to learn how this magical little seed made its way into the very veins of empire. The Ottomans didn't invent coffee, but they absolutely perfected its ceremony. The story of its arrival is the kind historians still argue over, mostly because it meanders like a tired camel through oral tales, trade documents, and the occasional poet's dramatic exaggeration. Most agree that coffee was first cultivated and consumed in what's now Ethiopia, specifically in the region of Kaffa, which sounds suspiciously like coffee for a reason. There's a famous, probably apocryphal tale about a goat herder named Kaldi, whose goats became extra frisky after munching on the red berries of the coffee shrub. You can't help but smile, imagining over-caffeinated goats doing a jig. That's not in the official records, but it's got a certain charm. What is documented is that by the 15th century, coffee had taken root in Yemen, particularly in the port city of Mocha. Yes, that Mocha. Back then, it was a bustling trade hub linking East Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and India. Sufi mystics were among the first known to drink coffee regularly, using it to stay awake during long night prayers. A spiritual Red Bull, if you will. From Yemen, the beans traveled north via caravan routes, long dusty lines of camels carrying everything from spices and silks to curious seeds. By the early 1500s, coffee began trickling into the Ottoman lands through Egypt and the Levant. Initially, it was seen as a curiosity, often brewed in homes or in quiet corners of scholarly gatherings. But by the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, yes, the guy with the dramatic beard and an eye for empire, coffee had made its way to court. Some say it was introduced by his wife, the famously sharp-witted Hurrem Sultan. Others claim it arrived via Ottoman governors returning from Yemen with a taste for the brew. Either way, coffee didn't just slip into the palace. It paraded in like a diva. You're told the very first Kavechibasha, your distant predecessor, was personally appointed by the Sultan. It wasn't just about preparing a good cup. This person had to be refined, politically neutral, discreet to a fault, and capable of reading a room faster than they could boil water. Brewing was the easy part. Surviving the job? That took talent. Interestingly, early reactions to coffee across the empire were mixed. Some conservative religious scholars weren't fans. They feared its stimulant properties might inspire disorderly thoughts, or worse, poetry. At least one coffee house in Mecca was reportedly raided and shut down in the early 1500s, accused of fostering un-Islamic behavior. There were debates, fatwas, riots, then more coffee. You sip thoughtfully from a lukewarm training brew as your teacher relays this. Everything powerful, he says, is accused of being dangerous at first. By the mid-16th century, coffee had conquered Istanbul. Coffee houses sprouted like mushrooms after a spring rain. These weren't rowdy taverns. They were sober spaces, sometimes too sober, where men gathered to talk politics, listen to readings, and occasionally get into heated debates about the moral implications of chess. One scholar even dubbed the new establishments schools of the wise. You're not sure how wise a man can be after 6 tiny cups of jet fuel, but you appreciate the optimism. Within the palace, however, coffee remained cloaked in ritual. The Sultan did not wait in line at the corner shop. He received his coffee like a king, silently, elegantly, and surrounded by attendants trained in the art of not making noise. The kahveci delivered the drink personally, always with 2 identical cups, one for the Sultan, one for the taster. This wasn't just about poison. It was about trust, about status, about putting your taste buds and sometimes your life on the line. Historians still debate whether any kahveci ever died on duty. There are no official records of poisonings, but court gossip from the era suggests a few taste testers disappeared after a poorly prepared brew. You make a mental note never to over-roast. What's more fascinating is that coffee wasn't just for sipping. It became a metaphor in palace poetry, a coded language among servants, even a tool for matchmaking. In traditional Ottoman engagement customs, a potential bride would prepare coffee for her suitor during the courtship meeting. If she liked him, the coffee was sweet. If not, it might contain salt, or worse, hot pepper. You wonder how many awkward proposals ended in a scorched tongue. Your instructor sets down his cup. The empire runs on stories, he says, and every story tastes better with coffee. You spend the afternoon sorting through a batch of mocha beans, marveling at their journey. From Ethiopian hillsides to Yemeni ports, across deserts and seas, into royal kitchens, and now into your very tired hands. As the sun sinks low behind the domes of Topkapi, you are allowed to rest, just briefly. You curl up in your corner bunk and listen to the city settling into night. Somewhere out in the maze of Istanbul, thousands are gathering in cafes, arguing gently, reciting love poems, sipping something dark and sweet. And you? You're learning to prepare that magic, one cup at a time. By now, your fingers know the feel of a good bean without even looking. You've learned to roast by scent alone. First the grassy note, then a soft bloom of toast, and finally that deep, rich aroma that feels less like a smell and more like a warm hand resting lightly on your shoulder. But today isn't about beans. Today you're handed something even more precious, the water. You thought water was just water, didn't you? A simple base to carry the flavor, hot enough to brew, nothing more. But no. In the palace, water is a philosophy, a hierarchy, a carefully guarded alchemy of source, temperature, mineral content, and moon phase. Okay, maybe not the moon phase, but you wouldn't be surprised. The Topkapi kitchens have their own spring, piped in from the Belgrade forest. The water is filtered through layers of sand, cooled in stone basins, and drawn only at certain hours of the day. Dead water, your instructor mutters disapprovingly, pointing to a jug that sat untouched for more than 6 hours. Tired, flat, it won't lift the flavor. You nod, pretending to understand, and immediately forget which jug is which. Today you're assigned to water duty. It sounds easy. It is not. First, you must carry the filled copper kettle, beautifully beaten and oddly heavy, to the hearth without sloshing a drop. The floor is slippery with flour dust and crushed rose petals from the confectioner's wing. You walk like a man delivering treasure on stilts. At the coffee hearth, you learn the sacred rhythm of heating. Never a full boil, never a standstill. You tilt the pot slightly, listening for that gentle hum just before the simmer. Too fast and the foam collapses. Too slow and the grounds never rise. You're trying to coax the water into cooperation, not bully it. Think lullaby, not alarm clock. Historians still debate whether Ottoman coffee was brewed with pre-boiled water or cold water straight into the kesvi. Some recipes suggest one, others swear by the other. Your master, ever cryptic, simply says, it depends on who's drinking. That's the thing about your job. It's not about your taste. It's about theirs. Every member of the royal court has their preferences. One likes it so thick it could stand a spoon. Another demands a whisper of cardamom. A third insists on 2 sugar crystals stirred exactly 13 times, then removed. You're not preparing a beverage. You're decoding personalities. Still, the water remains the most overlooked player. It must support without overwhelming. It must honor the bean's journey. And above all, it must be served at precisely the right moment. Not too hot, not too cool. Like a good secret. You sit back on your heels and stretch your fingers. Aching from hours of sesvi lifting and wrist swiveling, the day has been quiet, except for a brief scuffle near the dessert ovens involving a pistachio thief. The kitchen gossip is that a junior baker was caught smuggling candied walnuts to a lady-in-waiting. Scandalous if true. Or just love, which is worse for morale. During your break, you wander out to the second courtyard, where the scent of lemon trees drifts across the marble. You find a shaded bench beside an elderly steward who nods at your sesvi-stained hands. Water, he says with a knowing grin. They finally trust you. You smile modestly. Let me guess, he continues. You think you've mastered it. You hesitate. Not quite. He chuckles. Good. The moment you believe you've mastered water, it punishes you with steam in the eyes and a cup that tastes like old bread. He tells you about a kavechebasha from decades past who once used rainwater collected in a silver basin during a summer thunderstorm. The coffee was so good that the Sultan ordered stormwater to be stored in jars for special occasions. Only worked once, he says. After that, it tasted like disappointment. Back at the hearth, you're given your final test for the day. Prepare a cup for a visiting vizier, known for his sharp tongue and sharper palate. You take a deep breath, freshly drawn spring water, carefully measured grounds, a hint of cardamom. You let the chesve rest on the coals, turning slowly, slowly, until the foam begins to swell like a sigh. The coffee is poured without a sound into a white and gold cup, then placed on a tray alongside a cube of rose lucum and a tiny glass of water. Always serve water first. It cleanses the tongue. That's one of the few absolutes. The tray disappears behind a heavy velvet curtain. You wait. A few moments later, a page reappears with the empty cup. He didn't throw it. He whispers, "You're safe." Relief. Later that evening, you sneak into the cool storerooms beneath the kitchens. Not to steal, just to breathe. Barrels of rosewater line the walls. Cinnamon sticks as long as swords rest in bundles beside dried orange peel and green pods of cardamom. You sit on a sack of sugar and sip a leftover cup from your training batch. Still warm. It's not perfect, but it's yours. Outside, the city hums. A fairy horn echoes across the Bosphorus. Somewhere in the harem wing, laughter. Somewhere else, a lute plucks a lonely tune. You think about the water in your cup, how it came through forests, stones, and pipes, how it carried the stories of those who harvested it, filtered it, trusted it. You drink slowly. Each sip reminds you you're learning to serve not just a palace, but a ritual older than your own name. And somehow, it's starting to taste like home. Tonight, you're summoned not to the kitchen, but to the small courtyard behind it. A quiet space reserved for certain rituals the public never sees. The moon is high, pale and full, brushing the stone with silver. Two other apprentices join you, both equally wide-eyed and equally terrible at hiding their nerves. A tray rests between you, holding 3 identical cups, steaming faintly in the cool air. You are about to learn the secret language of foam. Yes, foam. If beans are the heart of Ottoman coffee, and water is its breath, then foam is its face. And like any good face at court, it must appear serene, polished, and untroubled, no matter what's bubbling beneath. A proper Ottoman cup is crowned with a thick, creamy head of foam. Not bubbles, not froth, foam. It should look as if it were painted on with a silk brush. You're told that a cup with no foam is like a guest with no manners. Still welcome, perhaps, but viewed with a quiet sort of pity. You begin your training by observing. An older assistant, gray at the temples and humorless to the bone, prepares a sezve over glowing embers. Not an open flame. That's too violent. Coffee prefers patience. He stirs once, twice, and then not at all. The kezve is pulled away the moment the foam swells. The trick, he mutters, is to stop before it begs. You try next. Yours boils over. Twice. The second time, your foam vanishes into a frantic hiss, leaving behind bitter liquid and scorched pride. Your instructor doesn't shout. He simply hands you a cloth and makes you clean the spill in silence. Historians still argue over whether the Ottomans invented the foam-centric method or inherited it from earlier Yemeni traditions. Some claim it began with the Sufis, who noticed that the layered brew mirrored certain mystical concepts, hidden depths beneath a calm surface. Others point to court etiquette manuals that treat foam like a status symbol. Only the powerful deserved the best head. As you finally produce a modest layer of acceptable foam, your instructor nods. Not approvingly, just a nod. You'll take it. Later, back in the preparation chamber, you're handed a tray of cups used by the Valide Sultan, the Queen Mother. Each one is slightly different, but always elegant. Delicate porcelain, painted with tulips, lined in gold. You're told not to touch them unless your hands have been rinsed in rosewater. So you do. Twice, just in case. These cups, you learn, are reserved for the tasting game. You raise an eyebrow. The tasting game is not a game at all. It's the palace's quiet way of checking your skills. Every week, a few lucky or unlucky attendants are chosen to receive blind brews. They drink and score them on taste, temperature, and foam. The feedback is anonymous. The consequences are not. Your future could depend on a cup prepared in sleepy haste or perfect focus. This week, you're not brewing for the game. You're the taster. The first cup is warm, smooth, almost floral. The foam holds for nearly a minute. Impressive. The second is spiced oddly. Clove, perhaps. It leaves a chalky aftertaste. The third? Too bitter. No foam. The flavor is like punishment. You whisper your scores to the page who records them in a leather-bound journal. You won't know who brewed which cup. That's the point. You realize with some amusement that your tongue is becoming political, not in the gossipy way, but in the careful, calibrated way of someone who knows that one careless sip could insult a superior or crown a friend. After the tasting, you're invited to sit in on a training session about flavor profiles. The instructor is not a chef, but a retired diplomat who once served in Cairo. He speaks of coffee the way some men speak of wine or poetry. Yemeni beans are bold, earthy. Ethiopian, lighter with a lemon whisper. Java, smoky, even cheeky. He gives you samples to smell, to grind, to sip in silence. One by one, they bloom on your tongue like stories unraveling. The diplomat leans in. Your mouth must become a map. Each note, a province. Each flavor, a rumor. Outside, the breeze picks up. A lattice of shadow dances across the courtyard as the moon filters through a fig tree. You let the warmth of the room, the lingering taste of cardamom, and the gentle chatter lull you into a hazy calm. And just when you think the day is done, your instructor hands you a new challenge. Tonight, you prepare your own signature cup. You blink. For whom? For me, he says simply, and for yourself. You return to the hearth. You choose Yemeni beans, familiar, comforting, a hint of cinnamon for softness, no sugar. You want the flavor to stand on its own. You heat the water just shy of a boil. You stir once, twice, then you wait. The foam rises slow and proud. You pour carefully. You sip. It's imperfect, but it's yours. Your instructor tastes, then gives you a rare smile. Not bad, he says, for someone who burned the sesvi this morning. You grin. Later in your bunk, you think about foam, how fragile it is, how easily lost, how quietly beautiful when it holds, like palace politics, like friendship, like sleep. You close your eyes. In your dreams, even the coffee has perfect foam. The call comes at dawn. You're barely awake, still curled beneath your wool blanket, when the sharp knock echoes through the sleeping quarters. You, coffee taster now. No one calls you by name here. Not yet, anyway. You sit up, bleary-eyed, fumbling for your slippers. The palace is always half-lit at this hour. The corridors wrapped in a gentle blue before the sun filters through the lattice windows. You move like a ghost toward the kitchens, unsure whether you're in trouble or about to be honored. Both feel equally likely. When you arrive, the kitchen is already alive with a soft hum. No clanging, no shouting, just the focused rustle of professionals at work. On the central marble counter rests a tray, gold, heavy. On it, a single cup of coffee, an untouched cube of sugar, and a folded linen napkin. You're told nothing. Just that this is your first real tasting. For the Sultan, your palms go cold. The Grand Vizier is one thing. The Queen Mother, intimidating, but manageable. But the Sultan? You've never even seen his shadow. And now, without warning, you're the final barrier between his lips and a poisoned cup. Because that's part of your job too. See, the Ottoman court didn't just value your taste buds for detecting acidity or balance. They relied on them to spot danger. Every cup for the Sultan passed first through the kahvechibasha and their most trusted apprentices. If you collapsed after a sip, well, the job had its risks. Historians still argue how often actual poisoning attempts occurred. Some say only once or twice in a century. Others claim the real number was hidden behind court silence and discreet funerals. Either way, the role was symbolic. And symbolic roles at court were never just symbolic. You're handed the cup. It's warm. The aroma is rich, laced with clove and maybe orange blossom. Not your blend, but close enough to feel like home. You lift it to your lips. The first sip is careful. You let it sit on your tongue. Wait. Swallow. Nothing burns. No bitterness. Just smooth, slightly spiced comfort. You wait 30 seconds. A full minute. Still breathing. Still standing. A nod from the kitchen steward, and the cup is whisked away through a side corridor that leads, if the rumors are true, directly to the Sultan's private salon. You'll never know how he reacts. If he likes it, you'll hear nothing. If he doesn't, you'll probably still hear nothing. But if he really dislikes it, well, let's just say you hope your slippers are good for running. Afterwards, you're told you did well. Not in words. Again, the palace favors implication. But you're offered an extra helping of stewed quince with clotted cream, which, in court language, is basically a standing ovation. Later, during your midday rest, you are invited to observe a rather odd ritual, the daily spice inspection. This isn't handled by the chefs, but by the Coffee Guild's own spice steward, a wiry man with an enormous nose and an equally large collection of miniature spoons. He opens drawer after drawer: cinnamon bark, cracked nutmeg, dried rose petals, crushed mastic, and sniffs like a composer reading sheet music. You think cardamom is just cardamom? He barks at one apprentice. Fool, there's eleuteria, there's amomum. One's sharp, the other citrusy. Choose wrong, and the Sultan will think you're serving bathwater. You're handed a seed pod and told to chew it. It numbs your tongue. See? Too old. That one's for the Janissaries, not the throne. It's here you learn that spices in coffee weren't just flavor, they were diplomacy. Different embassies received different blends. A visiting Persian envoy might expect saffron. A Venetian guest, perhaps a whisper of anise. The palace used coffee like a coded message. Welcome. Respect. We know who you are. Historians still debate whether the Ottomans added milk to their coffee. Most agree it was rarely done in the court. Milk was seen as rustic, peasant-like, something that dulled the boldness of the brew. Besides, it interfered with the foam, and we don't speak ill of the foam. After the spice lesson, you return to your workbench, your nose filled with so many scents, you wonder if you'll ever taste plain water again. But you're smiling. This morning, you tasted the Sultan's coffee and lived to tell the tale. You've chewed a numbing cardamom pod. You've survived the wrath of the spice steward. You're still here. That night, you sneak out again, just briefly, to the kitchen's tiny herb garden tucked beside the palace wall. Mint, lavender, lemon balm. Quiet smells. You pick a few leaves, rub them between your fingers. No one will mind. You think about how absurd and beautiful your job is. You sit in silence, sipping a practice cup brewed just for yourself. Foam clings to the rim. The night is cool. A distant call to prayer echoes over the Bosphorus. You stretch your legs and lean back against the stone, watching a cat dart across the moonlit path. You're not just tasting coffee anymore. You're tasting history. You wake to the smell of frankincense, not the strong temple kind. This is softer, like a memory clinging to a silk robe. It's wafting from the hall outside your chamber, mingling with the scent of toasted barley and honey. Someone's baking for the afternoon meal, and someone else has started the morning incense rounds early. Today, you're promoted. Well, promoted is a strong word. Technically, you're still an apprentice, but you've been granted a personal assignment, one that means you're finally trusted not to burn down the hearth. You're now tasked with brewing the daily cup for the chief astrologer. You didn't even know the chief astrologer had a personal coffee servant. Apparently, he requested one after a particularly bitter batch last week interfered with the reading of Saturn. This is a man who believes that your choice of roast affects planetary alignment. You respect the ambition. The astrologer's chamber is near the Tower of Justice, a quiet, sunlit room filled with rolled scrolls, brass instruments, and a very anxious parrot named Selim. You're greeted with a perfunctory nod and no eye contact. He's already peering at something through a brass quadrant and muttering about retrogrades. The man drinks his coffee slowly, in silence, with a long silver spoon he keeps polished in a velvet pouch. When he's done, he gestures vaguely and says, "Add ginger tomorrow. Mars is warm this week." Historians still argue how seriously the Ottoman court took astrological influence in their daily decisions. Some records show that major campaigns were timed by the stars. Others claim it was all ceremonial theater, power dressing for the cosmos. Either way, if ginger keeps Mars in check, you'll grate it gladly. Later that afternoon, you're called into the tasting room for your next lesson, ceremonial etiquette. This is where things get absurd. You're taught how to bow when presenting a cup to someone of higher rank. The exact angle depends on the person. 45 degrees for a vizier, 30 for a foreign ambassador, 15 for a respected poet. You joke that you need a protractor. The instructor does not laugh. Then there's the tray. Never with the left hand. Never unbalanced. The cup's handle must face right. The saucer must be spotless, as if blessed by angels. And whatever you do not speak while serving unless you're spoken to first. You practice the approach, bow, extend, move for hours. One apprentice forgets to turn the cup's handle. He's sentenced to clean all the copperware by hand for a week. You'll never forget the handle. The ceremonial codes may sound ridiculous, but they're not about coffee. They're about power. Serving a cup is a miniature act of politics. Who serves, how it's served, what it's served with. It tells everyone in the room who matters and who doesn't. One story from court legend tells of a servant who placed a cup ever so slightly off-center on the Sultan's table. The room froze. The Sultan said nothing, but by morning, the servant was reassigned to stables. Off balance in service, the scrolls read. Off balance in loyalty. You make a mental note. Always center the cup. That night, you help with preparations for a gathering in the Queen Mother's garden. She's entertaining visitors from the Safavid court, and her preferred blend is strong, laced with cardamom, and served with rose jam on the side. You spend an hour carefully warming the cups. Never pour hot coffee into a cold vessel unless you want the flavor to sulk. You observe from the bushes, half hidden, while attendants perform the service like dancers. One servant holds the tray. Another places the cup. A third offers the jam, which is taken with a small gold spoon, so delicate you'd swear it could bend in moonlight. The visitors seem pleased. They murmur soft praise. One of them whispers, "Even Isfahan would envy this foam." High praise indeed. After the guests leave, you help clear the garden. The roses look paler under moonlight, their petals curled from the day's heat. You pocket one, careful not to bruise it. The scent lingers on your fingers. Back in your quarters, you find a note. It's from the chief astrologer. It reads only, "Ginger improved the reading. Jupiter clearer." You may continue. You grin. It's strange, really. You began this journey thinking your job was simply to sip, to taste. But here you are, influencing planetary interpretations with root infusions, decoding the palace's emotional weather through ceremony and foam. You wonder if the coffee knows. The next morning, you're granted an unusual break, a rare pause. You spend it with the spice steward. He's in a good mood, humming something off-key while sorting clove pods. Want to try something dangerous? He asks with a wink. You raise an eyebrow. He pulls out a jar labeled Kahwa Hashkash, poppy-infused coffee. Not for daily use, he mutters, but once upon a time. You take a cautious sip. The flavor is soft and velvety, like dreams poured into a cup. You feel not dizzy but distant, like the world has dimmed just slightly, a whisper of warmth on your spine. It's illegal now, he says, smiling. Too relaxing, too powerful. You laugh or think you do. You're not sure. Later, as the effect fades, you scribble your own blend ideas in a tiny notebook you've hidden behind your bedding. Clove and orange peel for melancholy days, saffron and mint for summer heat. You're not a master yet, but you're beginning to understand the poetry of it all. And somewhere in the palace, someone is sipping the coffee you tasted, trusting your tongue. And you are no longer just a taster. You are becoming a storyteller in steam and spice. You rise earlier than usual today, long before the rooster crows from the gardens beyond the eastern wall. The moon's still hanging low, lazy in the morning haze. Your breath makes little puffs in the crisp air as you pad across the polished stone corridor toward the private kitchens. Today's cup isn't for a human. It's for a bird. Well, more precisely, it's for the master falconer. and by extension, his most prized hunting falcon, an irritable pearl-gray creature named Timal, who has a preference for fresh goat meat and absolutely no patience for newcomers. You're not here to serve Shamal coffee. Even this palace hasn't gone that far, but rather to accompany the falconer on a morning hunt. Why? Because the Sultan's falconers are known to drink a very special brew before setting out. Earthy, bitter, and spiked with just a trace of vinegar. They say it sharpens the eye. The falconer nods in your direction as you hand him the cup. He drinks without ceremony, squints at the sky, and grunts in approval. You follow him out into the palace gardens, where the grass is still damp with dew and the roses are folded in sleep. Samal sits on his gloved arm like a feathery tyrant, tilting his head and blinking slowly, as if measuring your soul. You watch the release. The falcon shoots upward like a whisper-turned arrow, soaring above the tree line, circling with that eerie, effortless grace that only birds of prey possess. The falconer sips again. Sour. Good. Keeps me awake, he mutters. Historians still debate whether vinegar was truly a common additive in Ottoman coffee. Some claim it was a regional quirk, popular in certain courts, despised in others. Others argue it was medicine disguised as flavor, meant to settle the stomach or ward off melancholy. You taste a drop from the leftover grounds. It's bracing, like drinking a poem written in capital letters. On the walk back, the falconer surprises you. He tells you a story. Decades ago, during a diplomatic visit from a Mughal prince, a royal hunt was arranged. The Sultan, wanting to impress, instructed his kitchen to serve a unique coffee after the chase, flavored with toasted sesame, dried fig, and cinnamon bark soaked in rose water. The prince was so enamored with it, he requested the recipe be carved into a silver panel and gifted to him on his return to Agra. You ask if the panel still exists. The falconer shrugs. Who knows? But that coffee, that was a drink worth chasing. Back in the palace, the spice steward is waiting. He's holding a tray with 2 tiny cups and one of his trademark smirks. You ready to fail? He asks. You raise an eyebrow. Today is the blind taste test. He's brewed 3 cups, each slightly different. Your task: identify not just the beans, but the roast, the spices, the brewing method, and the cup material. Yes, cup material. Because in this world, everything matters. Porcelain makes the coffee crisper, tin dulls the edges. Copper keeps it warm longer, but sometimes adds a metallic whisper, especially if not scrubbed properly. You close your eyes and taste. First cup, floral, lemony, soft on the finish. You guess Yemen beans, light roast, brewed in porcelain, cardamom, and a touch of dried orange. Second cup, darker, smokier. Hint of clove. Ethiopian beans, medium roast, copper pot, with a cinnamon stick steeped in the grounds. Third cup, bold, thick, almost chewy. A Turkish blend, dark roast, clay pot, brewed slow with nothing added. You open your eyes. The steward says nothing. Then he smiles. 2 out of 3. Not bad. You'll live another day. You realize something then. You're no longer tasting just for safety. You're tasting for story, for memory, for texture. You've learned to listen with your tongue. Later that evening, you're summoned, an unusual request, to the private quarters of one of the Sultan's favorite concubines. You've never entered this wing of the harem before. The air is different, softer, perfumed with rosewater and oud. The women move like silk in candlelight, laughter trailing behind them like ribbon. You're not here for gossip. You're here for lavender. Apparently, she drinks lavender-infused coffee every Thursday evening, says it soothes her nerves before the weekly poetry reading. You brew carefully, boil the water with a lavender sachet, let it cool slightly, then pour over the grounds. No sugar, just steam and scent. She tastes it, nods once, then offers you a poem. It's in Persian. You don't understand all of it, but you catch the rhythm. The mention of a night garden, a mouth full of stars, a cup that tastes like longing. You're not sure if it's about coffee, but somehow it feels like it is. Historians still puzzle over the use of floral infusions in court life. Was it luxury? Medicine? Mood regulation? Before the age of therapy? You think, probably all three. That night back in your quarters, you sit by the tiny oil lamp, notebook open. You write, Thursday blend, lavender, no sugar, served with poetry. Effects, calming. Echoes. You pause, then add, best foam yet. You're dreaming of coffee. Not metaphorically, literally. In this half-sleep state, the scent of cardamom wafts in through your window. The bubbling sound of a sesvi floats in from some far-off kitchen, and someone, somewhere, is laughing very softly over a joke told in Arabic. You wake with the distinct feeling that the palace itself is brewing. It's the morning of the Festival of the Tulips, a spring celebration so steeped in beauty and pageantry that even the cooks wear their good aprons. Today, coffee will be flowing in nearly every courtyard, pavilion, and shaded garden nook. It's your busiest day yet? You've been assigned to the fountain terrace where the lesser viziers are gathering to sip and gossip. This is where reputations are roasted more thoroughly than the beans. Your job? Deliver a new blend designed just for the occasion. Rose petal and white pepper, brewed with spring water collected at dawn. It's elegant, slightly spicy, and meant to whisper of the season, as your supervisor puts it, with an entirely straight face. Historians still argue over how seriously the Ottomans took their seasonal blends. Some say they were symbolic, each ingredient chosen for its alignment with celestial or religious calendars. Others think it was simple culinary creativity, one-upmanship with a touch of floral flourish. You think it's both, and today you're the messenger of spring, bearing cups like offerings. The viziers are a chatty bunch. One has brought his pet tortoise wearing a tiny purple ribbon. Another brags that he once drank coffee in Venice and found it watery and morally suspect. You nod politely and pour. One of them leans in conspiratorially. The trick, he says, is never to trust a cup that arrives too quickly. Good coffee should make you wait. Like poetry. Like revenge. You blink. He waves you off with a grin. Your next stop is the tent of the palace calligrapher, a shy man who smells faintly of ink and orange peel. He's been working all morning on a commissioned inscription, a Sufi poem to be etched into a tulip vase. You watch him draw curves and loops with the kind of grace that would make a cat jealous. When you hand him his cup, thick, syrupy, with a touch of molasses, he murmurs, "Ah." Letters are like coffee, some sharp, some slow. You're beginning to hear coffee metaphors everywhere. That afternoon, you assist in a demonstration for visiting dignitaries from North Africa. A small stage has been set in the courtyard with a copper urn boiling over a bed of sand, an old technique for slow, even brewing. The sand is heated from below, and the sesve is buried halfway in, its long handle jutting out like a sword from the earth. The coffee simmers gently, bubbling at the edges, never quite boiling. You perform the pour with exaggerated care. The crowd applauds. Then someone asks, "What's the secret?" You smile and answer truthfully, "The patience of the heat." They seem to like that. Later you walk past the gardens and see the janissaries, elite guards of the empire, gathered in a half circle, holding small cups in their massive hands. They drink it black, unsweetened, hot. No spices, no frills, just strength in liquid form. You learn that coffee is part of their ritual before drills. Not officially, of course, but it's tradition now. One of them calls it liquid courage with a kick. You pour for their captain, who thanks you with a grunt and a nod. Historians still debate how much influence the Janissaries had on coffee spread beyond court walls. Some say they were its biggest champions, even operating secret cafes in the city. Others suggest they merely drank what was available. You suspect the truth is like the grounds at the bottom of a cup. Hard to read, but richly flavored. As the sun dips lower, the festival winds down. You find yourself seated beside the water channel, sipping the last of the spring blend, watching petals float downstream like tiny pink boats. A boy runs past you with a paper kite, laughing. Somewhere a knee flute plays. Somewhere else, a dog barks once and is shushed by a very proper goose. You laugh into your cup. By evening, you're back in the scullery, rinsing out the sesvies, your sleeves rolled up, the copper warm in your hands. You're tired, but it's the good kind. The kind that comes from beauty and chaos and just enough pepper to make your tongue tingle. Before sleep, you visit your notebook. You write, festival blend, rose, white pepper, spring water. Notes, slight heat on back of throat, pairs well with ink. Observed, viziers bicker more politely after cardamom. Then you pause. You draw a tiny tulip beside the entry. You're not just learning to brew, you're learning to see. You begin this morning as you often do, standing before a cupboard the size of a chapel, trying to decide between 4 different types of cinnamon. Yes, 4. There's Ceylon, delicate, floral, the favorite of the palace astrologer. Cassia, bold and biting, good for winter. Saigon, sharp, almost peppery. And finally, herembark, a milder, local variety, soaked in rosewater and dried in silk bundles, supposedly for improved aroma. You choose Ceylon today. Not for yourself, but for the astrologer who insists it helps him see the stars more clearly. You've heard odder things. This afternoon marks a rare alignment of Venus and Mercury, which in the court's cosmology means a good day for beginnings, but not endings. The astrologer's been asked to consult on everything from building projects to marriages, and he wants his coffee exactly right. You grind the beans slower than usual, savoring the subtle shift in texture. Add a pinch of ground cinnamon and a thread of saffron, his request not yours, and pour in water from the marble fountain that only the scribes use. It's holier, he claims. You nod. You've learned not to argue with men who name the stars. Historians still debate the role of astrology in the Ottoman court. Was it genuine belief or simply fashionable pseudoscience? Some argue it was a means of cloaking political decisions in celestial justification. Others think it genuinely soothed the anxious minds of powerful men. You bring the cup to the astrologer's observatory, a room so cluttered with astrolabes and telescopes, it feels like the stars moved in and forgot to unpack. He takes one sip, raises an eyebrow, and says, I see the moon in your brew. Clever. You don't know what that means, but he seems pleased. Later, as the sky warms and the halls fill with lazy echoes, you're summoned to an unusual location, the Imperial Menagerie. You've never served coffee at a zoo before. The keeper meets you by the parrot cages, where one feathered resident immediately greets you with a screech of, "Late again," a phrase you hope isn't directed at you. The keeper laughs. He says that to everyone. We suspect a retired vizier taught him. You're not here for the parrot. You're here for the lion keeper. The man is a legend. Wiry, silent, always smells like sandalwood and raw meat. He requests a thick, clove-infused brew, served in a cup wrapped in linen to keep his hands from burning. He drinks facing the lion enclosure, never blinking. You ask him why cloves. He replies, "Reminds me not to get soft." You don't press further. Historians still argue about the symbolism of animals in Ottoman court life. Lions represented strength and divine favor. Peacocks were vanity. Monkeys, a warning against chaos. Some believe the animals were political metaphors, walking the gardens like living allegories. Others suggest the court simply had a fondness for exotic pets. You can't decide. All you know is that one of the monkeys once tried to steal your sugar pouch, and you've never trusted them since. By midday, you return to the quietest corner of the palace, the carpet atelier. This is where the finest rugs in the empire are designed, by women whose fingers move like dancers, tying knots into patterns more complex than any dream you've ever had. One of the older weavers always requests a small cup around this time. Her blend? Coffee boiled with pomegranate peel and a hint of mint. Keeps my eyes fresh, she says. You sit beside her as she works. The threads move between her fingers in a blur. Red, gold, blue. A swirl of flowers that don't exist in nature, but maybe should. She tells you that each rug has a secret, a symbol woven in, a leaf turned the wrong way, a bird with one extra feather. Something only the weaver knows. You ask if her latest rug has one. She smiles. Of course, but I'm not telling you. You sip your own cup, just plain today, no spices, and wonder what secrets you'd hide in thread. That evening, you find yourself in the music chamber. There's a new oud player in residence, young, shy, rarely speaks, but he plays as if his instrument weeps in cursive. He asks for his coffee, thick and sweet, like a love letter that never got sent. You oblige. As he plays, the notes spill into the hallways, wrapping around pillars, climbing the drapes like ivy. You close your eyes and lean against the wall, letting the sound and scent merge. You realize something. The palace runs on coffee, not just as a beverage, but as a rhythm, a heartbeat, a mood. Each cup is a key, unlocking different doors. Historians still wrestle with how deeply coffee penetrated Ottoman life. Was it luxury, ritual, or necessity? Some scholars propose it was the great social equalizer, consumed by viziers and janitors alike. Others argue it remained a symbol of refined taste, reserved for the elite. You know this. It reaches everyone. The astrologer in his tower, the lion keeper by his cage, the weaver with her secrets, the musician with his silent heart, and you, weaving through their lives, cup by steaming cup. Before sleep, you return to your notes. You write, astrologer blend, Ceylon cinnamon, saffron, scribe water. Parrot said I was late. Possibly true. Oud music plus pomegranate mint equals emotionally dangerous combo. Then a pause. And finally, today the moon really did taste closer. The sound of sandals slapping stone wakes you. It's the kitchen runner again, breathless, wide-eyed, flailing a scrap of parchment like it's on fire. You're summoned, he says, by the chief eunuch, immediately. You blink. That's unexpected. You've never been summoned by anyone with chief in their title, let alone the head of the inner palace. This is the man who oversees the harem, the royal quarters, and basically anything behind the screen of velvet privacy that separates the Sultan's world from everyone else's. He's also known to have extremely high coffee standards and a terrifyingly good memory. You find him in the marble courtyard, seated beneath a fig tree, flanked by two silent aides who look like they haven't blinked since last winter. Ah, he says, examining you like a particularly puzzling inscription. You're the one who does the thing with the saffron twist. You nod. He waves for you to sit. Today, he says, I require a coffee that tastes like discretion. Like secrets whispered behind a fan, like restraint. You resist the urge to ask if he wants it decaffeinated. Instead, you nod thoughtfully. Something subtle. Velvet. Not velvet rope. He raises an eyebrow. Approval, you're not sure, but he gestures for you to proceed. In the tiny courtyard kitchen, you work in near silence. You choose lightly roasted beans for a gentler flavor, boil with just a trace of violet syrup, popular among court poets, and finish with a single drop of almond essence. Not enough to declare itself, just enough to whisper, "I'm here." Historians still argue about the role of the chief eunuch. Some paint him as the shadow puppeteer behind the sultan's throne. Others say he was merely a gatekeeper. Powerful, yes, but limited to matters of protocol. You suspect both are true. The man drinks coffee like it's a coded message. When you deliver the cup, he sniffs once, then twice, takes a slow sip, then another. "Good," he says simply, then leans in. "Tomorrow you'll serve the Validi Sultan." You nearly drop the tray. The Queen Mother, the power behind the veil, the person whose opinions matter even more than the Sultan's, depending on the day. He smiles faintly. "You'll want to start thinking about rosewater." And just like that, you're dismissed. The rest of the day passes in a daze. You walk through the kitchens without seeing them, past the garden and its lazy bees, past the bathhouse where steam spills like breath. You end up in the corner of the herb courtyard, where old apprentices go to panic. There you run into the coffee roaster's assistant, a wiry girl with ink-smudged fingers and the uncanny ability to identify bean origin by smell alone. You tell her about the summons. She whistles. "Valid Sultan, huh? You'll need the good rosewater, the one we hide behind the lentils." She disappears and returns moments later with a tiny flask sealed in wax. "Also," she adds, "don't oversweeten." She's sharp, not soft. You thank her with all the sincerity you can muster, then retreat to your practice space, a tiny alcove behind the mint bins, where you run 5 test brews, all with rosewater, all different. One with nutmeg, too earthy. One with honey, too cloying. One with lemon peel, too bright. One with crushed dates. Interesting, but distracting. One with cardamom and a whisper of black tea. Now we're talking. You sip, think, adjust. Add a single dried cherry for depth. Brew again. It's a quiet process, slow and meditative. You don't realize the sky has darkened until a kitchen bell rings for final cleanup. Before bed, you sit with your notebook, writing by lamplight. Trial blends for Valid Sultan. Final pick: cardamom, rosewater, black tea. Dried cherry equals hidden depth. Note: feels regal, but not fussy. Might pair with pearl earrings. You stop and draw a tiny crown next to it. Later, you're awoken by a passing flute melody, a night musician drifting through the garden paths, practicing an old lullaby. You don't know the tune, but it soothes you all the same. Historians still puzzle over the emotional tone of Ottoman court life. Was it serene or stifling? Regal or restless? Do you think all of it? Every drop, every cup, every whispered note of rose and spice floating into the night. You're up before the muezzin this morning, heart tapping like a loose drum. Today is the day. Serving the Valide Sultan isn't just a milestone, it's a test, a performance, and possibly a once-in-a-lifetime audience with the most powerful woman in the empire. No pressure. You rehearse the entire brew again, precisely as you practiced. Cardamom, rosewater, a drop of black tea essence, and that single dried cherry, crumbled so finely it dissolves without a trace. As the coffee simmers, the steam curls like silk. You watch it with reverence. Then, the tray. A special one today. Silver, polished to near-blinding shine, the rim etched with a pattern of tulips and moons. You place a folded cloth under the cup, the good porcelain, rimmed in gold. You walk to the harem wing, accompanied by a steward who says nothing and seems to float rather than walk. No loud footsteps here. The door you enter is carved with calligraphy. A poem, maybe. You don't read it. You're too focused on holding the tray steady. Inside, quiet. Not silence exactly, but a hushed layering of fabrics and fountains. The soft clink of jewelry, the brushing of silk against silk. Then you see her, the Valide Sultan. She is older than you expected, but radiant. Robed in indigo and pearls, seated on a dais, cushioned with what must be clouds, reading from a scroll written on lavender-dyed parchment. Without looking up, she says, "You're the one who uses cherry." You blink. "Yes, Valide." "Good, set it here." You do. She sips once, twice, then holds the cup in both hands. "I've had many coffees in my life," she says. "Yours is among the few that don't shout." You're not sure whether to thank her or faint. "Stay," she adds, gesturing to a cushion nearby. "You'll need to learn how I like it. This won't be your last visit." You sit, awkward but grateful. The steward vanishes behind a curtain. The Valide glances at you with a half smile. "Do you know what this palace runs on?" You start to answer. She interrupts, whispers. Then, and coffee. But mostly whispers. She tells you about the Sultan as a boy, how he once tried to brew his own cup and nearly set the veranda on fire, how the viziers argue less when served bitter, how the eunuchs drink sweetened tea in private and think no one knows. You laugh softly. She smiles wider. Historians still speculate about the real influence of the Valide Sultan. Some say she ruled behind the curtain, shaping court politics with gentle force. Others insist her role was symbolic, an image of stability. The truth, as always, likely brews somewhere in the middle. Later, she finishes the cup and hands it back to you, still warm. "This blend," she says, "makes me remember who I am." You bow deeply. As you leave, you pass the tapestry corridor, the one no one rushed through. Each panel tells a story. Sultans, battles, rivers, stars. But today you notice a new addition, still being stitched. A tiny figure holding a steaming cup. You don't dare ask. Back in the main kitchens, everyone's pretending not to ask you how it went. You walk past them with practiced serenity, then duck into your corner and breathe for the first time in an hour. You add a note to your journal. Valide Sultan likes quiet flavors, memory in every cup. Reuse same dried cherry trick, this time with intention. Bonus, I didn't trip. That's a win. You spend the afternoon in the spice chamber, a vaulted room that smells like a traveling market. You're not here on duty. You just like it here. The shadows fall soft and slanted, and the jars glow like stained glass. The keeper of spices, an old woman who insists everyone call her Auntie Clove, offers you a snack of candied ginger and orange peel. You trade her a handful of pistachios and gossip about who's been sneaking cinnamon from the locked drawer. Your bet, the head gardener. As you relax, Auntie Clove asks, "What does your own coffee taste like?" You're stunned. No one's ever asked you that. You think, "My coffee," you say, "would be medium roast, no sugar. Just enough spice to keep it interesting, but not too much. Something warm, familiar. Like that corner of the day that's neither morning nor night." She nods, satisfied. Historians still ponder how much individuality existed in palace service roles. Were people merely cogs, or did they leave fingerprints on the imperial fabric? You like to think you're not just a fingerprint, but a whole handprint, a swirl, a signature in steam. As twilight falls, a peacock outside lets out its ridiculous honking cry like a trumpet with stage fright. You and Auntie Clove burst out laughing. In your journal, you write, "Today I made the Valide Sultan remember who she is." Also, peacocks are still hilarious. You fall asleep that night with the scent of rose and cardamom still lingering on your fingers. You're dreaming of floating trays, when a sharp knock interrupts the pre-dawn hush. The steward is back. He bows and hands you a scroll. This one bears the Sultan's seal. You stare, blink, unroll. A single line. Report to the Hall of Felicity at noon. Bring your tools. You don't eat breakfast. You try, but your stomach laughs and waves it away. Instead, you pace the length of the kitchen courtyard exactly 17 times before someone tells you to sit down before you wear a hole in the flagstones. Noon arrives with an extra dose of sunlight. Of course it does. The universe likes irony. You carry your satchel of brewer's tools like it holds sacred relics. At the Hall of Felicity, a guard with a beard the size of a broom lifts the velvet rope. You step inside. The Sultan is already there. Alone, seated cross-legged on a silk cushion, a tray of delicate biscuits beside him. His robes are plain today, deep blue with just a hint of embroidery. His turban is smaller than you'd imagined. He looks tired. Regal, yes, but also somehow human. "You're the one who gave my mother that dreamy cherry thing," he says. You bow. "Yes, my Sultan." He sighs. "She hasn't stopped talking about it. And now, apparently, I can't drink my usual without it tasting like disappointment." That feels like a compliment? He gestures toward a low table. "Impress me." No pressure. Just the ruler of one of the largest empires on earth asking for a beverage that doesn't taste like regret. You begin your familiar dance. Grind, measure, heat, stir. The copper pot glints in the filtered sunlight. The aromas rise. Cardamom, dark roast, a trace of cherry. But this time you go a step further. You infuse a single basil leaf, barely noticeable but grounding, for balance, for quiet power. The Sultan watches you, not in judgment, but in curiosity, like a man who rarely gets to be surprised. You pour, present. He sips, frowns, sips again, pauses, then nods, slowly. "I taste peace," he says. You say nothing. You breathe. "You know," he adds, "when I was 12, I tried to ban all bitter things from the palace. I thought it would make everyone happier. It just made the viziers cranky and my mother furious." You allow a quiet smile. "Turns out," he continues, "bitterness has its place." Historians still debate the personalities of Ottoman sultans. Some emphasize the grandeur, the ruthlessness. Others point to gentler traits, poetry, garden design, midnight walks. The truth, of course, is more brewed than black and white. You don't just serve coffee, you serve reflection. When the Sultan finishes, he sets the cup down with care. "You'll return," he says, "once a week, same time." A pulse of something, joy? Terror? Both, courses through you. "Yes, my Sultan." As you leave, the steward claps you gently on the back. "You did it," he whispers. "No one burned. That's a win." Back in the kitchen, you're greeted like a hero. Someone's hung an apron with a crown drawn on it. Someone else's attempted a song, off-key, mostly involving rhyming sultan with molten. You escape to the garden and sit beneath your favorite fig tree. You take out your notebook and write, "The Sultan liked basil, said it tasted like peace." Reminder, try that thing with saffron plus cinnamon next week. Also, maybe learn how to bow without wobbling. Just then, the old cat wanders by again. The one missing part of one ear, always dusty, always regal. He climbs into your lap and promptly falls asleep. You let him. Historians rarely write about cats in court records. They prefer treaties, battles, lists of imports. But you think this one belongs in a footnote at least. During the reign of Sultan Ahmed III, one coffee taster was regularly accompanied by a one-eared feline with excellent taste and shade. Sounds about right. As dusk settles, the lamps flicker on one by one, tiny stars echoing the sky. Somewhere the court musician begins a soft melody on the ney flute. You sip your own evening cup, simple today. No cherry, no cardamom, just pure bitter coffee. Perfect. Your weekly visits to the Sultan become a quiet rhythm, like the turning of gears deep beneath the palace marble. Each audience begins the same. A nod from the steward, a low bow, the presentation of the tray. But what happens afterward changes every time. One week, he wants something bracing, bitter enough to wake the dead. Another, he requests something that tastes like a rainy afternoon in spring. You oblige with a blend of mint, roasted fig, and just a breath of anise. You begin to notice things. He never drinks more than half a cup. He taps the rim twice before sipping, and he always smiles when the first scent hits him. One day he says, "It's strange. I've won wars. I've commissioned mosques. I've passed laws that will outlive us all. But this is what makes me feel human." You nod. You don't say it aloud, but you feel it too. Historians still wonder how much the sultans truly ruled, and how much was ruled for them. You can't answer that, but you do know this. When someone drinks your coffee, the mask slips just a little. Outside the throne room, your status begins to shift. No longer just the one with the cherry. You're now whispered about as the taster, a mysterious, steady presence. The janissaries greet you with respectful nods. Kitchen boys stop talking when you enter a room. Even Auntie Clove seems mildly impressed. She gifts you a vial of powdered iris root. "Smells like dusk," she says. "Try it on someone sad." So you do. A visiting pasha from Aleppo arrives, dragging diplomatic tension like a velvet train. You brew him something deep and smoky, sweetened with a touch of molasses and the faintest whisper of iris. He exhales after the first sip, like he's just dropped a 10-pound scroll. "Reminds me of my grandmother's courtyard," he says. "She kept violets in tin cans." You smile, mission accomplished. In your journal, you write, "Diplomacy through beverages, the real power play." Iris equals nostalgia. File under emotional ambush ingredients. Add "smells like dusk" to my list of compliments. One night, back in your quarters, you finally let yourself ask the question, why does this matter so much? Why does preparing a cup, this one small act, feel bigger than all the ceremonies? You think back to your first day, the burned pot, the panic, the fear that you didn't belong. Now, you belong, not by decree or title, but because you've carved out a space through patience, curiosity, and 36 variations of spice. Even your tools seem to know. The long-handled sesve gleams with a quiet pride. Your spice pouch is worn at the edges. The porcelain tasting cup you always carry now has a chip, and you've decided never to replace it. Perfection is nice, but realness makes flavor. You walk through the quiet gardens on your night off, sipping a blend you made just for yourself. Roasted barley, rose petals, and a pinch of clove. You hear someone nearby playing a lullaby on the ode. The notes linger like honey on stone. Historians still argue whether palace life was golden or gilded, whether it was a paradise or a cage. You suspect it was both, and somehow coffee made the cage feel less like a prison and more like a perch. Back in your room, you light the oil lamp and make one final note for the day. There are 1,000 ways to say, "I see you." One of them involves iris, molasses, and silence. I think I've found my language. The cat jumps onto your pillow and immediately begins snoring like an old general. You laugh quietly and decide he too has earned a name. You call him Cardelaine, Snowdrop, because he showed up just when things were coldest and reminded you spring was possible. Winter arrives in Istanbul with a sigh, not a scream. The palace rooftops glisten with frost. The Bosphorus, usually a mirror of shifting blues, now reflects only pewter skies and flocks of seagulls huddling like monks. You start adding cinnamon to the staff brews, not because anyone asks for it, but because warmth, real warmth, is sometimes an ingredient you have to sneak in. On Tuesdays, you're still summoned to the Hall of Felicity. The Sultan has taken to calling you Master of Mellow, which is equal parts honor and inside joke. You give him a different blend each week, but they've begun telling a quiet story. One about seasons, memory, loss, and small comforts. This week, dried plum, cracked pepper, a breath of dried orange peel. He closes his eyes after the first sip. My father used to burn orange peels in the brazier, he says softly. Said it smelled like the sun. You don't reply. Some memories aren't meant to be echoed, just held. Historians still wonder what sultans truly feared. Assassination? Rebellion? Disgrace? Maybe. But you suspect the real answer lies in silence, not the good kind like after snowfall, but the kind that settles in when no one dares to speak truth. Which is perhaps why your presence is so oddly valuable. You say nothing dangerous. You bring no scrolls, no reports, just cups, steam, bitterness, balance. You are allowed to exist in the quiet. The palace begins requesting more from you. A night blend for the Grand Vizier, who's been suffering from sleeplessness. A wedding blend for the niece of a concubine. A morning blend even, when one of the old eunuchs passes away. For that one, you use black tea, dried fig, and one solitary date, soaked in rosewater and ground to velvet. It tastes like soft sorrow and the memory of better years. The mourners cry gently and thank you without words. You realize something unexpected. This job, which began with fear and fire and the dread of a bad cup, has become a form of care. Coffee is no longer a test. It's a balm. One icy morning, you find a new note pinned to your spice pouch. In delicate script, what would you brew for someone who has everything, but sleeps like he has nothing? No name? No signature? But you know. You spend the entire day experimenting. You start with barley again, roasted longer this time, nearly bitter. Then vanilla bean, cracked open just enough to hint at sweetness. A touch of saffron for warmth. And something rare, crushed juniper, sharp and woody, like a memory hiding in a forest. You brew it in silence. You don't write it down. This one isn't for the notebook. That night you arrive at the Hall of Mirrors. It's empty, except for a single table and a single cushion. The Sultan sits there, not in finery, but in a cloak of camel wool. You bow, you serve. He sips, pauses. He doesn't smile this time. He just breathes, slowly, fully. Thank you, he says finally. Then he looks up. Do you ever regret not chasing more? It's an odd question. You think of what he means. Promotions? Command? Titles? The climb? You shake your head. I chased quiet, you say, and caught it. He chuckles, and for the first time, he doesn't dismiss you. He nods, like he gets it. The room feels less like a throne chamber now, more like a conversation between old neighbors. Outside, snow begins to fall. The flakes hiss softly as they land on the brazier's rim. The Sultan finishes his cup and sets it down with care. Come next week, he says. Bring that vanilla again, and maybe a story. You bow. This time your knees don't wobble. Later, back in your room, you find Cardlin curled up in your slipper like he pays rent. You light the lamp, write just one line. I brewed for an emperor, and he tasted stillness. And you realize, you're not just a taster, you're a keeper of calm. And just like that, spring returns. Not all at once. Ottoman springs are gentle creatures. They sneak in sideways, one almond blossom at a time, one warmer gust off the Bosphorus, one merchant humming on the way to market. You notice it in the way people hold their coffee cups again, cradling them less for heat and more for comfort. The palace starts smelling like mint, basil, and laundry hung in sunlit courtyards. You're still the palace taster. But now people come to you not just for the Sultan's latest blend, but for questions like, what should I serve to someone who won't stop crying? Or, my sister's getting married and her hands won't stop shaking. Or even, can you make something that tastes like the smell of bread at dawn? You always say yes. Your spice journal is now 3 books thick. You've cataloged over 70 combinations, each with tasting notes, emotional effects, and even suggested pairings, like whether to sip it in rain or with an oud playing. You start adding sketches too. A cracked sezve, a pigeon on the palace wall, the curled edge of a letter you never sent. Historians still argue over whether coffee was a political tool or merely a comfort, whether the palace's daily brews influenced diplomacy or just helped people survive the bureaucracy. But, you've watched hardened men soften over a well-spiced cup. You've watched decisions change after a sip of lavender and cardamom. And one morning, you're summoned again, but not to the throne room, to the kitchens. You find Auntie Clove there, standing by a row of apprentices. She looks older, but also sharper somehow, like time has polished her rather than worn her down. She gestures to the line of wide-eyed teens. These are yours now, she says. Try not to ruin them. You blink. Me? She nods. You've got the hands and the ears. You've made people feel things. Now, teach them how not to mess it up. The apprentices bow awkwardly. One drops a jar of saffron. Another sneezes into the sugar. You feel something swell in your chest. Panic, sure, but also pride. You clear your throat. All right, you say. First rule, every blend is a question. Your job is to guess the answer. They stare at you. You smile. Second rule, no cinnamon unless you mean it. They blink. You sigh. This will take time, but it'll be worth it. That night, you return to your quarters and find Cardillan in the window, watching the courtyard swallows loop through dusk. You sit beside him and pour one final cup. This one is for you. A blend of roasted chickpea, dried rosehip, and a whisper of thyme. It tastes like the first warm breeze after winter and the sound of a cat snoring on a pillow. You sip, you breathe, you close your eyes. In the palace that never sleeps, you found rest. In a life ruled by ceremony, you found ritual. And in a job that began with danger, you found peace. So now you're leaning back, eyes heavy, the last traces of that rosehip and thyme blend lingering on your tongue, like the ghost of spring knocking politely at your door. The palace is quiet tonight. Even the marble seems to exhale. Cardillan has curled into a perfect circle at your feet, his tiny twitching paws dreaming of pigeons he'll never catch. You watch the shadows stretch and soften across the tiled floor. Somewhere far away, a fountain murmurs, patient as ever. You imagine its waters catching the moonlight in small silvery shivers, like the final notes of a lullaby played just for you. And as you sit in that hush, it begins to dawn on you. Life didn't need to be grand to be meaningful. Your legacy isn't carved into stone or sung by poets, but infused in steam, steeped in care, passed quietly from one hand to the next. That's more than enough. So rest now. Let the spices settle. Let the fire die down to embers. Let the day's noise slip out the window and vanish into the leaves. You've brewed calm for everyone else. Now, finally, you can drink your own. The story has ended, but the warmth remains. And in this stillness, this gentle fade, sleep finds you at last,